What's up, guys? It's Dan. So I'm gonna apologize in advance for my voice today. I've held off on making this video for almost 2 weeks because I've been sick, and truthfully, I didn't want to wait anymore because I promised you all that you would have your guides. So here we go. So these guides will be a little bit longer than the last ones I've done for reasons of comparison to the patch notes and the major changes that have come with Color of Madness. Excuse me. So as we look at these guides, they're going to be a little bit longer. We're starting with the Vestal today, primarily based off of the importance of the Vestal and the fact that she's probably the most important hero class in the game. So we're going to start with her. So we'll kind of go through. We're going to start with some of the major changes to the classes that have happened with Color of Madness, and to kind of give you the Cliffs Notes version of how these guides will go. We're going to start with talking about the crit effect, the major nerfs and or buffs that the characters received, major adjustments to combat skills or camping skills, and then we'll go into looking at overall trinkets, quirks that may or may not have changed, and any recommendations as far as diseases that you want to carry or not carry. So with that, we'll get right into it. So in starting with the Vestal and what's kind of changed with her, we'll start first of all with her crit effect. So for those of you who may not know, with Color of Madness, one of the things that's introduced is every time you get a crit with your character or with a particular hero, that hero gets a short buff. Anywhere, I guess it would be between 2 and 4 rounds, depending on the ability, most of them being about 3 rounds, that are enabled because you crit someone. So it's a trade-off in that the monsters have also gotten more crits. And I've talked in my last video about most of the heroes don't have very good crit effects. The Vestal has the best one, in my opinion, in that her crit effect is plus 25% healing done. It's a no-brainer with her in that that's her primary job. So with that, we're going to go into kind of looking at the rest of her adjustments. So she has a very, very good crit effect, probably the best currently that's in the game. So if we look overall, her bleed resist took a minor nerf from 40 to 30%. Her damage at base level went from 4 to 9 to 4 to 8, and at max level went from 7 to 16 to 7 to 14. So her damage took a nerf, but truthfully, that's not what she's here for. And I know you can play classes differently and you can play her as a melee class, but that's not what she's here for. Everybody knows that. So really not that big of a deal. Her crit went from 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5% respectively. So her crit took a nerf. That is kind of a big deal. It's not a huge adjustment, but it's enough of adjustment at lower levels that it can make lower levels a little more, I don't want to say stressful, that's not the right word, but a little more difficult. So she went from 2.5 to 4.5 to 1 to 5. So at higher levels, it's a slight buff, but at lower levels, it's a pretty significant nerf when you look at it's more than half of what it was nerfed. So at lower levels, that can be a little bit bigger of a deal, but thankfully at lower levels, it really doesn't matter as much because they're significantly easier than champion level dungeons. So Mace Bash was slightly buffed. Again, not that big of a deal because not many people use it. The crit went from 0 to 2 to 0 to 4, and the accuracy was buffed 5 more. Here's something that's important. So Judgment, which is used by, it's pretty much in the standard build, the accuracy was increased, the damage mod was decreased. So, well, I guess I should say it was increased from negative 20 to negative 25. Crit went from 5 to 7 to 5 to 9, which is pretty good. And the heal went from 3 to 5 to 4 to 6. So that's good also. That's a positive buff for her because that ability is used pretty much, I would say, every turn 1 that you're going to have with a Vestal, outside of if you're significantly behind from a healing standpoint or if you choose to stun, either way. So that's pretty good. Dazzling Light, which is the stun. So Dazzling Light was buffed in that it's now usable in rank 2. Previously it wasn't. The base accuracy went from 80 to 90, which is good. And the crit went from 0 to 2 to 5 to 9. So again, that's another buff that she received. And Dazzling Light is something I haven't included in a lot of my other builds based off of a few factors. But now that you can trinket to it a little more significantly, it's one I'm going to recommend. But we'll get into that later. Divine Grace, which is the main heal, goes from 3 to 5 at base level and 7 to 9 at top level to 4 to 5 at base level and 8 to 9 at top level. So +1 in the minimum healing, which again is a pretty big buff. When you look at Divine Comfort goes from 1 to 2 healing at base level, 3 to 4 at max level, to 1 to 3 at base level, to 4 to 5 at max level. So again, another buff for the Vestal. So she's looking pretty good overall at how she was treated as we come to this DLC. I'm not going to really talk a lot about Illumination and Hand of Light, just from a standpoint that they aren't widely used, and they can be in certain builds, but I would say they're more situational than not. One of the things that needs to be talked about is Divine Grace and Divine Comfort are now considered stalling moves. I'm not going to go too far into explaining stalling moves. If you guys have been around for a long time, you know that stalling essentially can be punished with additional stress for all of your party members if the game considers that you're stalling too much. Again, with my playstyle and what I've talked about ever since the beginning is just kill the mobs and get it over with. Don't try and be, fancy and drag on the fights too long, because you will be punished for it. And it's even more punishing now than what it was in the last DLC. From there, we go to Prey, and we kind of look at Prey and where it was. So the Prey cost previously was 4. It's now down to 3. Probably where it should have been. It may actually... I don't want to say it needs to be at 2 because it involves all party members, but it's not really that great of a move unless you're completely building your party around all religious characters, and in my opinion that party really isn't that strong then anyway. So not widely used, but I figure it needed to be talked about. That was again a slight buff. So as we look overall to Vestal and the changes that she took, she had a lot of positive things done to her, I would say. So she's gotten some love. Another thing that needs to be talked about is Hippocratic. So Hippocratic for her, plus 20% healing skills, is pretty much the meta, obviously, when it comes to having a Vestal into running one. So some of the other perks you can go with for her, or quirks I should say, speed's always something that you could consider for sure, because you look at speed and you look at what it means for saving some of your party members that may be on death's door. That's always a factor there. But Hippocratic is pretty much the one you absolutely positively want to take. Outside of there, flexibility, you have quite a bit when it comes to taking her quirks. I mean, I would say keep it simple, stupid. Luminous that has speed and dodge is okay. Speed's pretty significant. You're not going to use her in a combative manner, really. So anything that would give her addition when it comes to a healing skill or speed are pretty much the no-brainers. Her crit mod, you could say you could take it. It's not absolutely critical. Steady is also another one to consider, as you never really want your Vestal to be stressed out. That can lead to passes when you absolutely need her. So Steady's another one you could consider there. Moving from the quirks and overall quirks, let's talk a little bit about the combat skills. So overall, especially when you're running through the endless mode, this is the build I would recommend. You have Judgment, Dazzling Light, Divine Grace, and Divine Comfort. I'm not going to say Mace Bash is never usable. It's situational, as are some of these other mods here. I mean, Hand of Light, I can see you may want to use that if you're running through the ruins. If you're going to run a melee build on your Vestal, but we all know that you're probably not running a melee build unless you're really just screwing around, I would imagine. So this build here is the meta. So Dazzling Light is something I do want to touch on. So the stun, especially in endless mode, when it comes to the Vestal, it becomes more and more valuable. And you guys will be like, damn, you always hated stuns. I haven't hated stuns for probably like, I don't know. Since early access. I hated stuns in early access, admittedly, but it isn't as bad as what it used to be. So the stuns are, there is a place and time, and that's how I would put it. And in endless mode, stuns become more valuable in that your fights really don't end, and sometimes you need to just stand back. You need to stall someone in order so that you can get caught up on whatever it might be. Maybe it's a buff that you need to do, maybe it's a heal that you need to do, but either way, Dazzling Light has a place in that a lot of the meta builds don't have stuns. So if we talk about the meta build in endless mode, is probably considered Jester, who's not going to have a stun. Some people say it's the A-bomb. Some people say it's the leper in the front row. I would say neither of those. You've got the Man-at-Arms and the Shield Breaker are very good combinations. You have the Man-at-Arms and the leper, possibly. You have the Man-at-Arms. I mean, there's so many different ones, but this is essentially very similar to what that meta build would be. And if you take the Shield Breaker, you could replace her with the A-Bomb, who I think is very strong and kind of underrated. Or you have the Leper, which everyone considers, I think, to be the meta, generally speaking. So if we look at those, the Leper doesn't have a stun. You look at the Shield Breaker, you're probably not going to run the stun with the Shield Breaker. So the Vestal is really your only option. Now you may say, well, you have a stun with the Man-at-Arms, but the Man-at-Arms is going to be too busy doing other things in this particular build. That's not really what he's designed to do. So whereas yes, you're right. His primary job is to protect and really just to buff, and that's what he's there for. So as we look at this particular build, her ability to stun when she isn't needed to heal, because she won't be needed to heal as much because your party's going to be buffed with a bunch of dodge buffs. You probably trinketed for that, so her stun becomes that much more valuable. So that was a really long drawn out explanation for why it's there. So don't be afraid to take Dazzling Light and utilize it a little more, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the trinkets. So as we look at the heals, that's pretty obvious. Judgment's pretty obvious. That's stayed the same for a long time with the Vestal. So moving on, we'll kind of look at the trinkets and the build that I have. So the build that I'm using right now, I feel, is one of the stronger ones when it comes to the healing. But another thing that needs to be brought into play is if you do buff her skills from a trinket standpoint, or her stun skills, I should say, particularly, I think it pays dividends in endless mode. Now, not necessarily in another mode. You're not probably going to use stun as much. You're going to have other characters that can stun. But in endless mode, I do think there is some value with bringing that particular stun buff trinkets, whether you're going to use the one in her set piece or run the whole set piece, or any other, the selective ones, Stunstone or anything like that. Buffing her stun from a trinket standpoint does have value, and it's something you should consider, especially in endless mode. Now, as you look at the other trinkets, the Tomb of Holy Healing, any of the plus healing skills, I believe it's, the name escapes me, Junia's Head, or the one that gives you plus healing and plus stress. My stance on the plus stress trinkets still stands. I don't feel that the plus stress is worth the additional heal, and that carries through. Most of the plus stress trinkets don't have the value to counteract that stress. Now, there are exceptions, and I will talk about some of those, Ancestor's Pen being one of them. If the Raider's Talisman for the Grave Robber has plus stress now, which I believe it does, that's another one for consideration, but again, that's another topic for another day. So as we look at her trinkets, buff speed, buff healing, and buff stun would be the three things I'd tell you to take without giving you a meta setup of her trinkets right now. But you guys know what those are. So In looking at her camping skills, again, her trinket here with plus 33% stress skills while camping. Um, this carries more value when you look at chant and you look at pray. So they carry a little more value, and that's something to consider as you're going in. But even encourage, which is a no brainer to bring over wound care, because you can't really cure stress with the vast majority of people in your party, but you can cure heal with an AoE heal or whatnot. So it's significantly better than wound care. And in most heroes situations, you're not going to run pep talk, and you're only going to run 3 of the 4 camping skills. So her encourage there becomes significantly better, and then it now heals for about 20 stress instead of 15. So it makes her more valuable when you get to a camp. And in my opinion, I think it's a great addition if you are going to run the diary as one of your trinkets. So as we look at camping skills, you can trade out chant for sanctuary to prevent that nighttime ambush. If you are camping at the end of dungeons, it's a must take in my opinion. That's one of the first things you're going to use, especially because if somebody was initially on has the mortality debuff, they're going to get an additional 25 stress plus 33% stress, which is probably about 33 stress total is what's going to be healed, and you're not going to get ambushed. You're going to get a heal, but at the end of the dungeon, that doesn't matter. It's more for the stress and preventing that ambush. And then pray and chant are almost interchangeable. It depends on the party build, and if you're building around a religious character, I would typically take encourage as bless as always takes, and then mix out these others depending on the build and what you're doing. As we look at diseases and moving on to those, the fits I think is really one of the only ones you would want to take, in that you get that additional speed, but probably not worth. I would just wipe all diseases on your Vestals. They don't need any help in having Murphy's Law apply to them. So with that, just a couple more notes on the Vestal. In my opinion, she is now even better than what she was versus the Occultist previously. That's a question I get a lot. The Occultist does have a place, but in risk versus reward in Darkest Dungeon, often the risk doesn't outweigh the reward by bringing the Occultist. So when it comes to overall, Vestal significantly better than the Occultist. We will go into the Occultist later. Vestal significantly better than the Occultist when you look at Endless mode. There are particular bosses and dungeons where the Occultist is going to be a better play, but it's extremely situational. As we look at the Vestal overall and where she ranks, guys, she's probably, again, she's absolutely top 5 in that she's very critical. She may be the top overall. We'll go through that as we go through the other hero classes, though. So overall heroes, she's probably between 1 and 3 is where I'll put her, because she's that valuable on almost all runs. You need her in endless mode. You need her in pretty much almost every dungeon that you run through. Even short ones, having a Vestal is more valuable and safer, which is typically the best play you want to do, unless you enjoy being miserable. So with that, thanks for your patience. I know this video was a lot longer than the others, and these videos will be longer as we look at Color of Madness and the changes to the classes. So I hope you all don't mind the length. Again, sorry for my voice today. I know it's way off. And as we move forward to these next videos, guys, I will be doing 1 to 3 videos a week. I am now in my off season from my main job, which, if you've been following me on Twitch, is I now own a bait and tackle shop or a fishing store. So we're just coming out of peak season, so I'll still be busy, but not as busy. In the off season, I'll primarily travel, so I'll have a lot more time to make DD videos for you all. So I hope you're excited about that. Thanks again for all your support. See you guys in the next video. Join the Discord, and come hang out on Twitch every once in a while. I'll post those in the links below. See you.